health, parenting, finance, travel, and home improvement. This is the Suburban Folk Podcast.
Hey guys, it's Greg with the Suburban Folk Podcast. Over on the show, we focus on saving for your child's college. If I can break this down into two very specific categories, we've got the parenting aspect, making sure that you're guiding your child to a decision that is right for them based on their interests, abilities, and skills. And then there's the financial aspect, wherever you fall in the decision of paying for all of your child's education, some of your child's education, or none of your child's education. What plan can you put in place, and what tools do you have available to make your money go as far as it possibly can? On the parenting front, the main thing that we want to emphasize is that no one solution fits for any one student. There are a lot of different avenues. We want to make sure that people understand as many of those avenues so that you can be as savvy with those decisions as possible, and also present those options to your child so that they can start to make an informed decision. Some of those considerations would be the type of school. Of course, we've got our 4-year degrees, and within those, there are private schools. There are state schools. There are for-profit schools. There's bachelor's degrees. There's associate's degrees. There are also technical schools, and you could even have the path of being an apprentice and going through a path that way. So that would be one of the steps to make sure that you research. For most of what we focus on is in that 4-year degree and some of those options, because frankly, when we talk about savings, that's where the highest cost ends up being. And you have to be pretty savvy to make sure that you're doing everything you can to keep those costs down. Every day we hear about the student debt crisis and what can be done to basically alleviate it. So if you can avoid it for your family and for your child, of course you want to be able to do that. In general, the state schools are going to be less expensive if you reside in the state that you or your child ends up attending. Whereas the private schools, there will potentially be scholarship money, and you'll want to go through all of that process. Their sticker price, if you will, before any of that tends to be significantly higher. And then again, if you go to a state school and you do not reside in that state, or in other words, out of state tuition for them, you'll also see a much higher tuition rate. Something else to consider that we talk about is community college. Does it make sense to attend the first couple of years at community college, which is much less expensive than going to a 4-year school all 4 years, and then transferring, with the caveat that you want to make sure you know that the school you want to transfer to accepts those community college credits, and that you're on the right path, that you don't have to repeat certain classes or anything like that is a specific thing you want to make sure of. Also, of course, from the parenting side is having these conversations with your kids, figuring out where their interests lie, and whether or not a 4-year degree, for example, will really even help them in their overall career, or if there's some other path that they should be looking for that will really help some of the potential heartache on the back end. Here is a clip from Paul Fagan, who was my guest on the show. He is one of the Financial Dads podcast hosts, and he also emphasizes that there's not one size fits all, but you want to at least have a plan, because you could be facing some major financial hardships afterwards.
College is not, it's not a mandatory thing. And that's the one thing that kind of drives me crazy, which you said at the top of the podcast, was the stigma of, if you didn't go to a 4-year school, you're going to be shunned. And that's ridiculous, because, and the other thing is, if you can't afford to go, you have to figure out the mechanisms that will enable you to either go in the future, go now, but you have to do it methodically and smartly. You can't do it with just, I'll sign away my 4 years, I'm going to go full boat, and and at the end, I'll worry about it. And some people will tell you that's the way to do it. That's what they do. I don't know. I see too many people that are stuck. I got to talk to different people over time, different walks of life. And, if you're a barista working at Starbucks, and I'm not knocking Starbucks, but if you're a barista and you have $250,000 in debt, you need at least, X amount of dollars to support that debt. You can't make that.
The second part of the show that I mentioned that we wanted to really emphasize is the financial avenues or tools that you have available should you decide to pay for all, some, or none of your child's education. Again, we primarily focus on 4-year degrees in this particular segment, and the most common tool that gets used is the 529 plan. So we'll head over to the SEC's website for a quick overview of that. And of course, if you want to hear more of our discussion, jump over to the podcast. You can find us on any podcasting application, and you'll hear even more in-depth discussion. Here we are on the SEC's website. This is sec.gov for the introduction to 529 plans. The first thing to know about a 529 plan is that it is a tax advantage plan. That means that your money goes in after tax, but any gains that you realize, as long as you spend them on qualified educational purchases, you will not be taxed on those gains as compared to a traditional brokerage account. Within these options, you have the option for an education savings plan as well as a prepaid tuition plan. We focus a lot on the episode on the education savings plans, which functions much like a 401k or an IRA. You put your contributions in, you'll have specific investments to choose from. Hopefully, of course, those investments increase in value, and when it comes time to spend on college, you've got more in there than you started with. The prepaid tuition plans offer tuition rates at today's rate so that you can lock that in. Basically, if college continues to go up like it has, then you were able to prevent the inflation so that you don't have to pay those rates when they go up when it comes time to pay for college. There is a consideration for fees. Of course, the most prominent would be whether or not you're spending the money on qualified educational purchases. Be aware of those, as well as other handcuffs that may be part of the account. We talk about a few of those scenarios in the episode, but there's also ways to get money out without penalty. Also, from a federal and state standpoint, there should be an option in your state. It varies, check with your state, but you can get a tax write-off on the state side, not necessarily the federal side. Be aware of any restrictions that may apply, including the max amount that you can put into the plan. And again, back to what the applicable withdrawals are, and that you don't spend on something that you're not able to spend on. Finally, there's a question about financial aid and eligibility. For this question, I feel like the answer is that it depends. You definitely want to be in touch with a financial professional to understand your specific situation and how it can affect you. And of course, there's plenty of other links on the site. I also recommend Investopedia.com. It's a great starting point for you to get educated and start to build your understanding of how 529 plans work. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully, I gave you a few things to consider in figuring out what's best for your child as far as college options are concerned, and ways that you can be prepared so that you don't become burdened with student debt, which we hear so much more about. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share. And again, head over to the podcast where you'll hear an even more in-depth conversation for more tips, tricks, and ideas for you to consider. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.